Okay, welcome back. In this session, we're going to look at how do you treat, greet, seat, and then follow up with first-time guest. Okay, we probably won't get to all of that in this session, but we're going to take a pretty good chunk at it, and then we'll spend at least 2 sessions on first-time guest. Now, as we get into today's session, let me just remind you of our key verse for assimilation. It's from 2 Peter 3:18. It reads, "You must grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ." And the truth is, for most people, that process of growing in Jesus Christ, of understanding who Jesus is, it starts when they come to church for the first time. So I don't know if you can remember in your own personal walk with God when you came to church for a first time. But coming to church for the first time can be a very intimidating process. And even if you can't remember coming to church for the first time, you can certainly remember going on vacation and checking into a hotel for the first time. Perhaps you went to a large resort and you walk in there and you're not even sure where to park or where to unload your luggage or where the front desk is. This can be a very confusing and unsettling experience to go somewhere that you've never been for the first time. Well, when it comes to first-time guests, they have the same experience as you have when you go somewhere for the first time. But unfortunately, coming to church is even more intimidating. You know, it's a very intimidating thing for someone who's never been to church to show up at a church for the first time. They don't know where to park. They don't know if they're going to be welcomed. They don't know if they're going to like the people. They don't know if they can trust you with their children, or they don't even know where to enter. And some of you have renovated your sanctuary so much that if they come in what looks like the main door, they actually walk into the choir loft. So this is something we really have to think about, that first-time guest experience. And you know, a lot of people will come to church for the first time, but it's a very difficult challenge to get them to return to church for a second time. But here's a startling statistic. People decide whether or not they're coming back to your church within the first 7 minutes of arriving. So within the first 7 minutes, they're making up their mind, am I going to like this church and am I going to come back? So you have 7 minutes to make a good impression. Now, there are some things you can do to overcome that if you make a bad impression, so it's not like it's your only chance. God will give you grace and hopefully power, even if you mess it up. But we want to do all that we can in those first 7 minutes to make a good impression on our first-time guest. And so if you think about it, if you're a teaching pastor or a preaching pastor or the senior pastor, first-time guests have probably already made up their mind before you've even delivered the first word of your sermon. And contrary to what you may think, first-time guests often show up early. They're the early arrivers. It's your regular attenders that often show up late. So they show up before the service starts. Maybe they sit in the parking lot for a couple of minutes and watch people go in and out of your building to try to figure out how the flow might work. They might go in and sort of spy on the children's area before they go to check in. They might arrive in the sanctuary when there's just a handful of people. And what are they thinking about? What are they experiencing? What are you putting in their hands? How are you creating that experience, basically from the parking lot all the way into the church, and then once they get back home? Well, that's what we're going to look at in these sessions. When someone comes to your church for the first time, I want you to focus on 4 big areas. And so this session and the next session will be broken down into these 4 big areas. The first area that we're going to look at is what I call pre-service. Pre-service. This is the focus that I want you to have in your church before the service even starts. So you can kind of think of the pre-service area as the area of first contact. It's the time they arrive into your parking lot and they make it all the way into the pew. Or the way I like to think of that is from the street to the seat. So before the service even starts, you've got to get them from the street into the seat. Now, let me just put you in the mind of someone coming to church for the first time. So maybe you can think of someone who recently was a guest at your church. I almost said a visitor at your church. I'd have been cursing at you here in our second session. But think of someone who recently was a guest at your church for the first time. If you know them, maybe you can literally visualize them. Let's just take a family who lives down the street. Maybe it's a mom and a dad, and they've got 1 or 2 children. Or maybe more likely, it's a mom and a stepdad, and it's a mixed family, and he has a child from the first marriage, and they have a child together. But whatever the situation might be, on Saturday night, that family makes a bold decision to say, we're going to go to church tomorrow. And the kids say, church? What does that even mean? What time will we have to get up? We're going to miss Sunday morning television. Maybe dad's even a little reluctant, or maybe mom's a little reluctant, but somehow or another, this family makes a courageous decision, I would say led by the Spirit. Probably God is already working in their life through some tension, transition, or trouble that they're going through. And for the first time in a long time, or maybe for the first time since never, they are thinking about going to church. And so now on Sunday morning, they have all of these dreams about what that Sunday morning is going to be like. Maybe dad thinks, I'm going to get up early and cook pancakes for the entire family, and I'm going to make this a great Sunday morning, the best Sunday morning that we've ever had. And mom has dreams about how she's going to dress and how she's going to dress the children and how they're going to make it down to that church. Now, that's going on in the positive side of their mind. On the flip side, they're thinking, I wonder if we'll be welcomed. I wonder if we'll see anybody we know. I wonder if there'll be people like us. I wonder what the children's ministry might be like. I wonder what the pastor is going to teach on. So they have all of these concerns as well. But even on the best of Sunday mornings, in this particular couple's life, everything is going to go wrong. You see, when someone decides to come to church for the first time, it's almost like they're sort of inviting the enemy to do everything he can to distract them. And so Satan begins to work in that couple's mind. And in that home, the alarm clock doesn't go off. The pancakes get burned. The kids spill something on their new outfits. Mom didn't have enough time to get dressed like she would like to get dressed. But in spite of all of that negative things that happen to try to prevent them from coming, let's just imagine somehow or another, that couple gets into the car, they make it out of their driveway, and they arrive onto your church property. Well, at that point, when they pull into your church parking lot, assimilation begins. You may not be able to control what happens at home. You may not be able to control whether or not they come to church. You may be able to in some way, by the way. That's another seminar that I have on evangelism. But when they pull into that parking lot, you want to do everything you can to make that the best first 7 minutes of their life. So let's talk about that area of first contact, or the big area of pre-service. So when someone pulls into your parking lot, as they're in the parking lot, as they're making their way into your building, there are 4 areas of first contact. So 4 areas of first contact. Here's number 1. Number 1, how are they going to be greeted? Greeted. How are they going to be greeted? Now, when you think about greeted, and I'll explain why they all start with ED, you'll see as we go along. But when you think about greeted, you often think about greeters. And I want to talk about greeters and give you some advice on greeters. In fact, in the supplemental resources that you have with the seminar, you can see a basic job description as to what a greeter should do. But there are really 2 types of greeting that a person coming to your church for the first time would receive. The first is the inanimate greeting of all the inanimate stuff at your church, all the non-human stuff. So for example, your parking lot is a greeter. Your sign is a greeter. Your signage is a greeter. And so what is the physical environment of your church saying to the people who are attending for the first time? I mean, how does your sign look? How is the yard maintained? Is the parking lot clean? Are entry points clearly marked in your church? You know, it's very expensive, of course, to keep all of this stuff up to date. If you've got a large parking lot, that can be very expensive just to maintain that. So I'm not talking about perfection. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about excellence. So let me give you my definition of excellence. Excellence is doing the best you can with what you've got. It's doing the best you can with what you've got. You know, maybe you're a church that's been struggling for a long time, and the parking lot, it needs a lot of repair. But you can do the best you can with what you've got. You can pick up the litter out of the parking lot. You can weed it. You can spray it and remove all the weeds from the parking lot. You may not be able to repave it or to repaint it, but you can do the best you can with what you've got. You may not be able to afford a lot of expensive landscaping, but you can keep things neat and trim, and volunteers in your church can make that lawn or that upkeep around the church, the landscaping, look as good as it possibly can. Well, you see, all of these things are greeting people who arrive. And your landscaping and your church sign and your parking lot are saying, we've been expecting you. We want to put our best foot forward. You're welcome here at our church. Or it's been saying, go away. We don't care. We're outdated. We're no longer relevant. And of course, I know which one you want. You want the physical surroundings of your church to put forward the best greeting they possibly can. And the truth is, some simple landscaping, a fresh coat of paint, that can make all the difference in the world. Now, for most of our Journey locations, because we're in major metropolitan areas, and we do have locations that are not in urban areas, but for most of our Journey locations, we meet in rented facilities. Now, some of our places own their own building or have a long-term lease like many of you, but a lot of our churches meet in rented facilities. I remember one time we were meeting in an elementary school, and we couldn't do a whole lot about the broken sidewalk out front of the elementary school. We couldn't do a whole lot about those little toilets that they have in an elementary school. But people knew that we were meeting in an elementary school. They knew we had no control over the sidewalk. They knew we had no control over those little toilets in the bathroom. We were in an elementary school. But here's what we could do. We could do the best we could with what we had. We could do the best we can with what we have. That's my definition of excellence. So we could clean those toilets. We could spray down that elementary school restroom. We could sweep and even mop or spray down the sidewalk out front. We could do the best we could do. And that's really what I'm asking you to do, to put your best foot forward, to do what you can do. If you have money, by all means, this is a great place to invest it. But if you don't, do the best you can with what you have. And the truth is, if you're in a rented facility, you probably get a little more grace from those who attend than if you own your own facilities. Because people know if you own it, if you're there 24/7, 7 days a week, then you should be able to keep it as clean and as well kept as possible.